Vijay, also known as IVK, is the co-founder and CTO of Crayon Data, a big data analytics product company at Singapore with a development center in Chennai. He's also an active member of India Angel Network, a syndicate for early-stage capital to invest in startup companies. His current technical interests and activities include recommender systems and choice theory, product and taste affinity graphs, customer analytics, text and graph mining in both B2B and B2C contexts. He worked at Wipro for more than 2 decades before entering into the startup world. He was one of the core group members to set up the telecom business in Wipro and led the wireless and telecom application businesses before becoming Wipro's CTO. He is one of the core members of CII's Innovation Council and a charter member of TIE. He serves on the governing council of CMI Algo Labs, an industry academia initiative by Chennai Mathematical Institute. In social impact segment, he is a partner with Acumen Fund in India and helps their investee companies in the education sector. IVK is also one of the leading experts in innovation management and advanced technology incubation in India. He's also recently turned author with his newly published book, The Manual for Indian Startups. Ladies and gentlemen, it is now my delight to welcome on stage IVK.
Thank you, Mohan. I have to start with a confession, I would say. I did look at the DigitalOcean website yesterday. I do know about DigitalOcean because I'm part of the same community, but I'm not a customer of DigitalOcean. However, I should say, I like the tutorials a lot. I haven't spent too much time. As we say in investment community, if the chemistry doesn't exist, the arithmetic doesn't matter. The lingo used in the tutorials is purely developer-oriented, so I think it feels, good and refreshing for me. Before I start, I thought I should just give you the perspective and the vantage point I take in many of the topics I'm going to cover. I'm asked to cover the lessons which one can learn from the startup community in India as seen by us, that is the 5 authors of the book, and a bit of history on how it started. So that's my part 1, which will have slides. The part 2, which is, so what should a startup do? What has been the journey or experience of others? That is just a voiceover. There are no slides for that. But just to give you some kind of a context and color to the perspectives I take, I spent about 30 years in IT industry, 5 years in real-time embedded systems, 15 years in large capacity switching, 5 years in wireless and mobile devices, 5 years in enterprise IT, 5 years in big data and AI. That's kind of the profile I have. And in the context of cloud, of course, it is a bit funny that I say it here. I did serve on the advisory board of Azure, and as a company, we use AWS. But I should say that I like the tutorials a lot. So I will have a serious look at DigitalOcean. So I also saw many of the discussions, both technical and commercial, or business, I would say, from an investor perspective as well. So I think my comments should be interpreted as what I've seen in a large corporate trying to do innovative things, perspectives from a small startup trying to do big things. Also in a cross-border situation, which I'm involved, which is both Singapore and outside. I'm in India, and I'm involved in the other axis as well. So it's a mix of things. So the first part of my presentation is about why we felt, or some of us felt, as a part of the National Council for Startups, at that time called National Council for Innovation and Entrepreneurship, NCII, why there is a manual required for Indian startups. So I'm going to share, why we thought that way and what we discovered. And while we have been entrepreneurs ourselves, we realized that writing is also an entrepreneurship journey. So we were having some surprises as well. So I think that's a good way to look at it. And so let me just start. So in 2014, there was a debate as a part of the National Council, which is led by Chris Gopalakrishnan, whether we need any manual or any advice for the startups in India now that they are scaling a lot and there is a lot of buzz around it. So there are a lot of views about it. What we felt was there are many books about startups to read, right? In literature, I mean, you can go to the websites, you can go to the blogs, there are many, I mean, and all of them are useful. What we found was that in India, in the context of India, we find the startups are in two angles or two dimensions. One, startups which focus on India as a market, where they sell to India. That means they close the loop locally from a business point of view. There are other startups who focus global market as their primary market, but they deliver from India and build platforms or solutions. Now, what we found is the literature available for Indian context or Indian case studies, to put it in a management sense. If you refer to a B school, that's how they call it. Either the literature or the publishing was available as a series of inspiring stories and how people made it big. Actually, most of it is about how they made it big. But we felt that it's a good bedtime reading. There is not much you can actually do because somebody made it good, so it's good to learn, but then, so what about me, right? The second aspect, which is very unique to India, we found that there are a lot of nitty-gritty things which happen in the first 18 months of the journey, 18 to 24, to give and take. As we often say, the most mistakes get committed at that time, which are a bit difficult to reverse. So we felt that we should write something which will explain what are the best practices or some kind of a cookbook, if you want to say, call it that way. And that was the intent with which we started. Initially, we thought we will actually write a report, which is what most forums do, on what should be done to encourage an ecosystem in India, which is specific to Indian practices and beliefs and value systems. You'll be surprised that I'm using India as a operating word there, and it is intended to be that way. I did live outside of India, so I do know how things work outside. But there are some things unique in India, nothing to do with technology actually, something to do with how we think, how we behave. So we thought there's something we should capture that in a business sense, in that sense. And we thought we should have it as like a nodal document. So that is the kind of a very broad perspective we took in 2014. So then Mr. Chris Gopalakrishnan said, why don't you just write a process document? So true to our word, we actually submitted a kind of a recommendation of some 2-3 pages on what all it should contain. So when we presented, Chris said, why don't you write the book? Instead of saying that, you should just, suggest that somebody should do it, right? So we then decided that let's focus on the first 3 years of the journey of the startup. That is, the segmentation was 0 to 36 months. And most of the issues are generally at that time. In other words, to use an investment lingo, pre-Series A. Okay, so 0 to pre-Series A. And we thought we will cover and capture some templates which are typically used, required as a manual. And we thought we can just build them because they are not available. So I spent some time with a legal firm to look at what templates one can build. As an example, founders agreement. So nobody has any founders agreement. There are some templates available, but it has to be tuned for our context. And so we picked a few templates which we thought are required. While we can have many, we thought we should make sure that it's readable and portable, etc. So I spent about 3-4 months along with my co-authors. And authors are myself, Professor Sadagopan from IIIT Bangalore. Names must be familiar to you. Meena Ganesh, Alok Mithal, and Sriram Sirpamanya. So we do represent the academia, the investment community, entrepreneurship, corporate, all kinds of mix. So that was the group, and we deliberated and then looked at just maybe a couple of templates to build. And we just took an inspiration that is like a toddler trying to, walk, so baby steps. So we just fixed the initial ones. And since it is not available to download from anywhere, and to ensure that it is rooted in the context of India, we have built it grounds up. So it's a kind of a framework for some of them. And we also ensured that it is something which you can read or use it as and when you come across that phase, rather than like a novel which you can read from start to finish. That was the idea. And just to break the monotony, we thought we'll add some perspectives, promoter speak, etc., from various categories, so that there is some element of context for sector. The book is written without any sector in mind. While most of us represent maybe the IT sector, some of us do represent other sectors, but it is very easy, in fact, I would say, if it is only a web startup, because you don't come across many issues which actually happen to startups in other sectors, right? Pollution control, for example, you don't have to worry, right? So there are a lot of things. So we took a very broad brush and said, let's take it as a generic one without worrying about it is applicable to a specific sector, so let's pick only the common ones. But in the promoter speak, we added some perspective from other sectors. That's a very quick look of how the table of contents looks like. And so that's what happened. So as we say that writing is also an entrepreneurship, we actually grossly misunderstood or perhaps maybe underestimated the effort required. What we thought was, once we have the templates, what is that to put in a book? Except Professor Sadhugopan, none of us actually wrote any book. We wrote blogs, we wrote mails, we wrote reports, but never wrote a long format book. So I would say that maybe we didn't really know what it was. But then we signed up with Penguin, and then we realized that is one of the, publishing mentors, I would say, to tell you that you can't simply put a series of templates in a book and publish it. Nobody will read it. There is no continuity, there is no flow, there is no chapterization, so nobody will read it. And they also told us to make it less than 250 pages, if anything has to be read. I didn't know why, but it is 250 to 300, they said, is the typical size of the book, otherwise nobody will read. And so it took us some learning on the publishing side, which I think we didn't know. And then we added the narratives for each phases, because it is very difficult to read a book if you just have a series of forms or templates. So that's what happened on the chronology. It took us 2.5 years. What was supposed to be, I thought, a 6 months work. Okay, so much for So that was the launch in Delhi. You can see most of the central government, state government people there, including Chris and myself. So what happened? So if I look back, right? Well, it took more time than what I thought. I think the question, just like a startup, right? The biggest challenge was what we don't want to cover. Because if you want to cover everything you want to do, then it's a very long book to write, right? I think that was the scope control was one of the learnings we had, right? And the other learning, I would say, while all of us spent maybe 30 to 35 years in business, and I'm very familiar with international contracts, including being trained in contract law, as well as IPR law. But it took me a long time to realize that the publishing contracts work differently. So I would say I have to learn that from scratch. Now, on the content side, we also kept a conscious view that we should cover non-IT parts, because a lot of startups who actually struggle are not necessarily from IT, or they are not from cities. So these are two dimensions we had. I don't know whether we have done a full justice or not, but this is one thing we always had in mind. The other one was to how many templates to give. So that is about how much we can put it in one book. Now the question is, where do we go from here? So the book was launched in April, May, and then both an ebook and the print version. You will see the print version outside. The feedback we got was, it is good to read, very useful templates, very useful to just to get started. However, one feedback we got, which is perhaps also feedback from you required, there is one area which is missing because most companies which are about 3 years old or so, they're also looking at things like product management. Product management in Indian context. Is it same or is it different? Franchisee agreements, because most companies scale sometimes with a franchisee operation or a business agent model. So there's some ideas which came, which we thought we should add. Maybe they are required for completeness. So there's something we are looking at. The other dimension we got, which is a bit surprising, but it's heartening to hear, given the rise of IoT startups, in IoT you also have something to do with hardware, right? So a lot of manufacturing-related stuff comes in, and which the book, or actually there is very little information available or even support available. If you want to support, sign a contract with, for example, a production side contract with, say, one of the Chinese suppliers, or a fab contract with Taiwan, you will have very few people who know what it means actually. So I think there are, because of Make in India and other initiatives, we thought maybe that is something we should look at. But these are some of the ideas. We just started working, but we have not, written anything yet. Now, that's the slide part of it. Okay, so it's not thank you yet. Now, I was asked to also explain, in the journey so far, we met many startups. So most of us who also invest, who also run our own companies, so we do see a lot of traffic in that sense. I'm also on the Deep Tech Committee of NASSCOM. I'm on the IoT AI track. I saw on many of the juries. So we do see a lot of traffic. So what is it that you would like to share is one question that is often asked to us, that if we are in a startup in the early phases. Now I will be very direct and perhaps brutally honest. The first advice I would give, please have a founder's agreement. If you are starting because you are friends from childhood, then I strongly suggest that you have a founder's agreement. In all scenarios I've seen as an investor, the biggest problem is that when we are about to give a term sheet, somebody says, oh, well, that's not what I had in mind. These are very informal agreements or understanding, which is a problem when the moment you are valued, right, in terms of money, or assessed for risk. I have very hilarious or maybe very embarrassing situations where, in fact, there are 3 bankers who came to me who said, I saw the same thing, please have a founders agreement, they're childhood friends, colleagues. They said, that's over the weekend. I said, sure, I wish it is. That took 2.5 months. So I found that in India, we take many things informally and maybe take a lot of things for granted. I would strongly suggest to have a founders agreement. I have also seen the negative side of not having it. When they're about to get a Fortune 50 company as a customer, I was their mentor, by the way, somebody wants to just take it away and only one founder, one guy thought he is the founder, the other guy just worked for him. He said, I'll pay you off for all the effort you have taken. So it went to an arbitration. So there are many scenarios. Okay, so I can entertain you with a lot of stories if you want afterwards, but some are quite hilarious. So I would say that is the first one. The second one is not so dramatic as the first one, but I think something as a promoter you should remember. It is very easy, the risk-return trade-off for the founding group, the promoter group. It is not so apparent for the core team who are not in the founding team. They take the same risk, but they don't get the same return. So you have a 3-tier architecture, right? Since most of you are tech. The lower part of the tire or the junior part of the tire is like any employee working for a startup, they get paid, right? They may get equity, they may not get equity. The founders have mostly equity, they may not take salary initially. But then you attract others who are also senior enough, but they're not having a founder's equity in the same percentage. So it is like sitting in a car, you take the same risk, but somebody else drives it. But the return is not the same. So holding or retaining the core team beyond the founding team is one of the things one has to consider on people systems or HR systems. Something to look at. Especially when you scale, if they leave, you will have a serious problem. I think something to think through. The third point I would make, the same argument on the investor side. We take money on goodwill, in goodwill, right? So a lot of money is taken in the initial 6 months, 9 months, 12 months. You typically hit a proper seed investor maybe in 14, 16 months. Maybe the institutional investment of an angel network in 18 months. In 24 to 36 months, Series A, if everything goes right, the money you have taken initially starts haunting you. Because they're taken as an informal basis. We don't know, is it debt? Is it equity? What is it, right? No agreement is there. So when you actually try to invest formally, somebody will look at it. I want to know who is on the cap table. So I have situations where it is raised from family and friends, and there is some 50 lakhs on it. I asked, so what is it? Is that 50 lakhs? This is it's a family loan. It's a loan. Can I get something in writing that it's a loan? Is it a loan? Then I'm asked to meet the family person, and happens to be the in-laws. And so the person asked me, what's the valuation? I said, 5 crores. He said, in that case, it's equity. So sometimes you'll have some situations which are a bit funny and which we cannot solve from outside because there is no formal agreement on how the money was taken. I want to know how it is treated on your books and what is the understanding. So I would strongly suggest that be a little formal when you raise initial funds. I will also give you a little negative maybe news on investments in the early stage. As I said, I will be brutally honest. We have rogue promoters in India in startups. We also have rogue investors. Just remember that. Nobody is a saint. Now, we have found in some investment cases, they actually give you more valuation than required. So you will take it. Then it will trip you in the next round where nobody will give you that valuation. You'll be forced to go back to the same person. Then they will ask you what they want. So there are a lot of things which also have, because there are a lot of investors in angel rounds in India, while they're institutionalized in some cases, their source of money also comes from different industries. So everybody doesn't belong to the Silicon Valley mindset if you're used to tech. So you need to be a little careful on how you raise your money in the initial months and make sure it is documented. The fourth one I would say is on the, it's about a right brain model. Startups is about trading off vision and traction. You start with a vision, you will eventually find traction in business, right? It's a balance. If you only build it on vision, you don't make any money. If you only do traction, you just fulfill somebody else's vision. You need to make that call in 18, 24 months, or you know what scales. It's very humbling experience to accept what actually scales. It may not be what you wanted, yeah? Or you stay put and pursue your vision. So it's a call you have to take. There's no right or wrong answer here. You run out of money, just remember that. So you may have contracts. Companies close because they run out of cash, not because they run out of contracts. So I would strongly suggest watch your cash. The last one I would say is when you want to expand, you typically use somebody else to get you a market because you want to enter a new market or a new region or a new sector. Those agreements, we need to be very clear, especially in the first 18 months, I would say, or first 2 years, just to be careful on, are you using them to validate the problem or you are trying to actually sell and scale? You need to be a bit clear on what it is, right? And I found that there is a lot of flux there. So I would strongly suggest that make sure that you use the right people for validation and the right people for actually selling, right? You want to actually sell, right? Not just check whether it's okay, right? So I think these are the 5 points I want to leave the thoughts with you. There are many others, but I think I'll just stick to this 5. And I think the more formalism you get in terms of thinking, it's not just writing, right? It's also about thinking, especially in the core team, because it is a kind of a journey which pushes your limits. So I think it's good to keep that in mind. Yeah? Thank you.